All right, it looks like we're live. And so I was watching Trey, and Trey often says something that is unintentional can't intend something intentional. And I'm generalizing that to mean that he doesn't think that a property that you find in an effect can can't be in the cause, or it has to be in the cause. And I think I've heard you say something like that before, Max, but I was hoping that you could present an argument or explain it a little bit better than just that claim that we hear from Trey.
Well, Trey isn't actually the only one who makes it, and he's not the only one who makes it for intentionality. In fact, you could make it the exact opposite. Um, there's Paul Churchland, who's an unlimitivist. He doesn't believe intentionality exists. He thinks it's a byproduct of folk psychology. And by folk psychology, he would mean it's just something that we popularize in day-to-day conversation. It's just a matter of language, and we kind of made it into an actual thing. But anyway, the argument goes like this: intentionality doesn't exist in nature. It's not posited for the theory of evolution. It's not posited for the origin of species. No one's ever intended it. No one's ever used it for any of our natural sciences. It's not used. Why bother having it? It's not something that could even emerge. What we constantly find is natural cause bringing up natural cause, and yet we're supposed to believe there's something of an almost supernatural quality that just comes about. So you actually have Churchland making an argument a little to the opposite effect, and it's cited in Edward Feser's Scholastic Metaphysic.
Intentionality is used in science, though.
So outside in the natural sciences, or are you referring to sociology, psychology, the softer sciences?
Well, like neuropsychology, for example, which would be a subset of biology.
Is it? Well, I would. Well, you'd have to argue that with Churchland himself, but I guess that you would ask what predictions does it make? How is it useful?
Also, it doesn't follow that if something isn't sciencey, it doesn't exist, or it's likely not to exist.
He's not saying it doesn't exist. Well, he is saying it doesn't exist. His argument is from the fact that it doesn't exist in any of our scientific or natural causes, and yet we're supposed to believe. How is it supposed to come about?
A necessary precondition for him having an argument is that he has intentional states.
Yeah, and that's an a priori argument, and he's mostly coming from an empiricistic background. I'm not making his argument for him. What I am just saying is you have this argument being made on both sides, on both the naturalistic side, especially the side that tends far more into the eliminativist camp, but you also have it coming from people who are on the opposite side. Edward Feser makes it to the other extreme. He thinks that this is kind of a sign that God would have to intervene in it. ID proponents would make it on the other end.
We can find opposing positions on practically any issue, though.
Right, and that's true. So now it all stems from...
Yeah, go ahead. Keep going. I want to hear I kind of want to hear the supporting stuff that you were saying in live chat that you could offer that it seemed like Trey maybe couldn't offer.
Oh, all right. So the argument usually made is like this. Ex nihilo nihilo fit. It's a standard of classical Greek metaphysics, which is from nothing, nothing comes. If you have a negation of something, or a negation of all things, then nothing would ever come about. you need there has to be some entity in existence. And they take this kind of more general principle and apply it to causality. So the idea follows that if we have something that exists at one point and it comes from, and we're attributing an earlier cause from it, and there's an aspect which exists in the effect which didn't exist in the cause, then the only alternative would be that thing would have popped into effect out of nothing prior to it.
What does it mean for an effect to exist in a cause?
All right. So this goes to the nature of causality. One kind of example where it's it's far more evident is in terms of if someone was to come to you and say, "Hey, what's the cause of this boulder?" and no one would accept as an answer, "Oh, this much smaller rock over here." The rock, there's nothing about the rock. The boulder is in much greater size. There's much more matter and energy to it than what exists in the smaller object. There would be some element of the rock that would be unexplained or unaccounted for in the object itself. Now this can be explained now due to the laws of conservation of mass and energy, but earlier, before this kind of later development in physics happened, you had it explained rather than mass and energy through a distinction of act and potency. Like for anything which existed, there was an aspect to it which was actual, stable, there, active, like a red rubber ball. It's currently red, rubbery, in a ball-like shape, but it also has a potential to melt. You could paint it blue. It could be turned into a variety of other shapes. It has elements of it which exist there in potential. And you need some, and of course, when it moves from one state to another, it goes from one state of act, and from there, potency is derived, and then at another point, you have the object taking up a new state of affairs. But no one would believe that it would, for example, turn into something which is the exact opposite in every respect. No one would believe that it would turn into a specter. Maybe aside from the fact maybe one doesn't believe in specters, but it would be hard to think of how a visible material object could turn into something which is immaterial, unperceptible, all of it. So the basic principle is that there has to be some kind of connection between the ontology of the thing in question and the effects that it produces. Otherwise, one would have to come to the conclusion that something about the new state of affairs just popped into existence.
So the question was, what does it mean for the effect to exist in the cause? One thing that you had said is that someone can say that
it would
this smaller rock is the cause of a boulder, right?
Right.
The reason that won't be accepted is because objects are not causes. So I can give a specific example of cause and effect, right? Like a pool ball moves, strikes another pool ball, and causes the other pool ball to move. What would it mean to say that the movement of the second pool ball exists in the first pool ball or something?
Right. So on this account, we have a distinction between. So are you kind of giving it more of an event versus an agent causal account?
I don't know how.
So the
causations wouldn't be also events.
Right. So what does it mean? So if event 1 leads to event 2, or event 1 causes event 2, and event 2 causes event 3, then what is it about them that necessitate one another?
I don't think that that's an answerable question.
Yeah, agent cause. Yeah, so one of the benefits of the more Aristotelian account is that take your pool ball objection. Pool ball 1 hits pool ball 2. Hume can one can and Hume brings this up in coming up with causal connections. What necessitates one hitting the other? Whereas on the Aristotelian model, when you say pool ball 1 hits pool ball 2 and pool ball 2 just keeps going, what you're really just doing is describing the cause and the effect simultaneously, but from 2 different perspectives. So really what's going on is you're just describing the 2 simultaneous changes that are going on in the ontology of the first one and in the ontology of the second one, where one is losing momentum and one is gaining it.
I don't see how a change in velocity is a change in ontology.
Because a change in velocity is part of the ontology of the pool balls. So really, they would exist through both the ontologies. Basically, all motion is just reducible to change. Like motion in the old Aristotelian sense just meant that.
I take ontology to be about the ultimate nature of things that exist, the way they are, like independently of how we happen to experience it, right?
Uh-huh.
And I don't see how a change in velocity changes the fundamental nature of, say, a pool ball. The nature is the same. It's just at one time it's motion, and the other time it's not in motion. Otherwise, you'd have to say basically they're 2 different pool balls. One that has because you're changing in ontologies, right? So a stationary pool ball, when it becomes in motion, becomes like a different pool ball or something.
Right, but so the way I'm understanding ontology is that a thing has ontology in 2 ways, insofar as what it is and what potentiality it can have. So by potentiality, what changes it can possibly undergo. So, for example, for example, there are people who have skills as singers or musicians, and even though they're not currently singing or playing an instrument, they still have the capacity to do so, whereas people who aren't musically trained have no capacity to do so.
I can ask, what in virtue of what does a pool ball have the potential to move another pool ball?
Oh, yeah, that goes to what's called prime matter, and prime matter just is the pure potency which exists in the ontology of the object, which allows it to undergo future changes. And prime matter is different from secondary matter, because secondary matter is the emergent matter which individuates essences which would otherwise be identical to one another.
It just sounds like you say has the potential in virtue of having it or something.
It just has the potential. Like potentiality is just one of its qualities.
I'm asking in virtue of what it has the potential.
What do you mean it doesn't have to have it in virtue of anything.
And then I don't need an answer for. That's the same question you're asking me, basically, in virtue of what is like a pool ball able to move another. And you say, well, it has the potential to do it. I'm asking in virtue of what does it have the potential to do it? Because all it means to have the potential to do it is it's in fact able to do it.
No, what I asked you was what connects event 1 to event 2.
Right, and you're basically saying they're connected in virtue of being connected, basically.
They're connected in virtue of one one thing bringing out the potentiality of another thing.
That's just to say they're connected because they're connected.
So so everything
There's no difference between me saying a pool ball could strike another pool ball and make it move, and the pool ball has the potential to move another pool ball, right? You're asking me, how are the two connected, right? You're just rewording the same thing and then not answering in virtue of what it's able to do this.
Yes, but I'm saying its potential is a concrete aspect of what it is, whereas what I understand you to be saying is that events are just descriptions. Like they're just one state of affairs after another.
I don't know what an event could be other than something that changes over time. What else could an event be?
Well, from what I understand it, an event is just how we break down, is just our way of breaking down motion. You could break it down, you could break
but motion entails its changing position over time.
Well, time is just reducible to motion too.
Time's a necessary precondition for motion. It's not reducible to it, because anything that has movement has speed, and speed is distance divided by unit of time.
But don't those just boil down to mathematical equations? And by that, I just mean, from what I understand of physics, there's no discussion of causality that's even being discussed there. What we see are formula, and those formulas are basically just ways we use to understand the world around us.
Some physicists accept causation and others deny it.
They accept what causation? Self-causation?
Some physicists accept there's a such thing as causation and others deny it.
Right. But from what I understand of it, though, I think Bertrand Russell put it like this: there isn't or even Sean Carroll, when you open up a physics textbook, like an advanced one, you just see a lot of equations that are going down. You don't really see any reference to the word cause that happened, or transcended cause. He used specifically. Like from what I understand of it, when we use
that's because causation isn't a mathematical concept.
Yeah, like exactly. So from what I understand of it, time is also.
But that doesn't imply there's no such thing as causation. It's just like you can't have a physicist account of literature, for example. Doesn't mean literature doesn't exist or it's unlikely for it to exist, even though the literature books are physical.
Yep, and I would agree with that much. But the point of me just bringing that up was when you're appealing to physics just to understand time, just because the physicist will invoke an equation utilizing time, or anything of the like, what's being done is the physicist is just using an equation as. I don't want to use the term helpful fiction because that kind of already implies an anti-realism of science, but basically what's going on is physicists are just trying to capture things in mathematical terms. The mathematics doesn't necessarily entail that what's going on isn't an actual ontology, which which we can understand the world in. If time is just reducible to change, and physicists are treating time as something separate, as a way of for a way of calculation, it doesn't mean that time isn't reducible to change. It just means that time is better understood for the purposes of calculation, whereas time itself is just change going on. I mean, I don't know what it even means for time to exist without some kind of change being undergone.
I think there's a difference between physics and metaphysics.
Yes. So on time, right. So if you're not appealing to, so if time itself, like our understanding of time in physics, isn't what we're going to appeal to say time is reducible to change, then at the very least, the meta time in which it exists is going to ultimately be reducible to change, or that meta time. But ultimately, I don't understand what you mean when you say time exists. It's a different entity, but it ultimately can exist without change going on.
Somebody would have to have a coherent account of how to reduce time to change.
Well, I don't. In terms of, well, I mean, change is just when. So, from what I understand of it, different in terms of my own observation, I just see a bunch of objects. There are properties which are manifest, and then, of course, through interactions, I see new properties and new states of affairs being brought out of them. So what I'm seeing around me is just is change going on, and from there I kind of get my conception of time as that's happening. But I can't picture the opposite, where time exists and suddenly change is emerging from it. I don't know what that even means.
I can reword what you said by saying at time t1 things were one way, and at time t2 things were another. Therefore,
what do you mean by time t1?
At 9:22 p.m. it was one way, and 9:23 p.m. it was another way.
What's 9:21 and what's 9:22?
You don't know what?
I know what numbers are. I know, and numbers by rule can go in any order.
So
now what I'm asking,
you don't know what time is, but time's reducible to change.
No, I don't. Well, I know what time is, but I can understand time through change. I can't understand time by just appealing to sets of numbers. Like numbers stand for things. What do they stand for? You seem to be appealing to numbers for time.
Stamps are about points in time.
Okay. Yeah, time stamps about time are about time, sure, but what ontology do they represent? Like, if they don't represent an ontology, are you just making sets? Are you just appealing to a consecutive following of numbers? And if so, aren't those just rules you're making up?
In your description, you describe something new happening, right? Which just means it happened later.
Yep, so I have one observation, and then after it I have another observation.
So you were in fact appealing to time in your account of change by the concept of something new happening.
Okay. So let's just say that there was, so just as a thought experiment, let's say you were in a universe where you saw nothing around you happening.
I would still have an experience of the progression of time.
Okay, in your own mind, as it passes within your own mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so what if your own mind wasn't changing at all? It was just stable.
Then I wouldn't have a mind.
Okay, so there's a state of affairs where you don't. So there's a state of affairs where there's just one object. It's undergoing no change, and there's also nothing around it undergoing change. then what's the difference between that state of affairs with time passing and that state of affairs without time passing?
I'm not saying that time is a difference in state of affairs in objects outside of yourself or something. Like if you were at a deprivation tank, you would still experience the progression of time.
You could still experience a state of affairs, but what I'm asking is, what's the difference between the first scenario where there's an object, there's nothing around it, and a second one where the same thing's happening, but time is passing by. I'm not sure what the difference is between the two.
So you don't know what it would mean that the object existed unchangingly for 5 minutes?
Yeah, versus one where there is no time passing by. I don't know the difference between the two scenarios.
So an object can exist for 0 time and exist? It literally never existed, but exists, right? The object.
What if it was just... Wait, so you're saying that...
Hey,
so
sorry, man. Time out. You guys are getting really, really into it. Would you mind stepping back and explaining what the issue is each of you are trying to point out?
I'm trying to understand.
I'm saying that time is a necessary precondition for change. And
From
Max
what I'm
is trying to say time's reducible to change.
I think Max is saying we only understand what time is because we experience change. So it's change that is the thing that makes us understand the idea of time.
It's only in virtue of experience that we understand propositions, right? Or an elephant or something.
Yeah, but we're changing as that goes by as well. I mean, so I could also picture that first state of affairs, by the way, where there is no time passing by, everything's just static. And the second one where time... So
you're question begging by saying time wouldn't be progressing in virtue of things being static.
Wait, so you're saying that there's a... So I'm not following here. Are you saying that that things can't be static?
I'm saying that if objects didn't move, that doesn't mean time doesn't progress.
Okay, what's the difference between a state of affairs where it's static but things are progressing, and things are static and time isn't progressing?
Well, I don't think that physical objects could exist without time, right? To say,
well, why couldn't they?
To say this object existed for 0 seconds is the same as saying it never existed. There's no point in time in which it existed.
I don't see how that follows. I mean, something can exist. I mean, I have.
Can nothing
wait.
without...
Here's an example. Triangles don't exist in 4 dimensions. It doesn't mean triangles don't exist. It just means they don't exist in 4 dimensions. They're 3-dimensional things.
A necessary precondition for a triangle existing is spatial extension.
True, but it doesn't require a 4th dimensional extension. Likewise, I don't see why something couldn't exist statically and without time. Something could exist in 0 seconds in the same sense that some triangle can exist without 4-dimensional
it's like saying there's triangles with no space, not that there's not 4 dimensions.
Why is it more like that than triangles not existing in 4 dimensions?
I'm saying time is a necessary precondition for physical objects existing, and spatial extension is a necessary pre-existence for triangles.
I know that you're... Okay, know that you're saying time is a
You
necessary.
possibly fourth-
Well, I know you're.
You talking about a fourth dimension just isn't even relevant to the topic.
No,
Well, we're getting really far afield from the original point of the hangout in any case. So if it's all right with you guys, I'd like to move on a little bit. Because it seems like we've come to a standstill here. There's sort of two visions of time and what time is and how we come to know time. We're obviously not going to solve it here. So the next thing I want to talk to you about real quick is just to kind of put the conversation we just had in the back of our minds and go back to this idea of causes and effects, and effects not being able to have properties that their causes didn't have. And so just as an example with change, so if God is changeless, and then God produces a universe that has change in it, how come that isn't an example right there?
Oh, okay.
You're going to say that God has the potential for change, but just never changes?
So this actually works out to the scholastic notion of the great chain of being, which has its precursor in the Greek metaphysic that this derives from. So the famous example is between Heraclides and Parmenides. Parmenides thought that there is no change within existence because it comes to a fundamental contradiction. And he said, well, we start off with pure being. He said, well, whenever we look around us and see change, what we're really ultimately saying is something which just didn't exist coming from something which does exist. But the essence of existence is to exist. I mean, that's just necessary of it. So how is it going from a state of affairs where it's existing in 1 minute, then not existing in another, and something which didn't exist just coming into existence?
I don't think that when one pool ball strikes another, something new comes into existence.
What? Okay, I'm just describing Parmenides' position, not necessarily going to causality. And just to go to the opposite end from Heraclides, he thought that, well, really, you never go into the same river twice. Everything is change. Everything is just spontaneously coming into being from chaos. It's just popping out uncaused, and that's just the way it is. So really, all being is coming from non-being. Now, Aristotle didn't really care for either of these ideas, so he came up with kind of a synthesis for it. Him and Plato. Plato thought that there is a world of pure being, abstract ideas, concrete ideas, and these are the world of the forms, and really the material world that we observe around us is kind of the Heraclitean chaos, and really any kind of permeance we see is just this world reflecting the world of the ideal forms. So, for example, if you think of trees, there's the ideal tree, which is static, it's eternal, and every kind of finite tree is really an imperfect reflection of it in one way or another. Aristotle kind of takes that notion and he takes these Platonic ideals and he puts the forms as essences within the material world. So rather than having, the ideal tree, rather you have particular trees that all share a universal treeness, and that's the form, and the matter is what individuates it. So the matter is the principle of change. The prime matter is the principle of change, which exists in all of them, and from there we have trees which can lose their permeance as they go through cycles of change. Now, as this relates to God and how a change from an unchanging thing causing changing things, if the scholastics kind of understand God as pure being itself. So God is God is the being that sustains the material world in existence, because in him there is no change or potency. So change is really kind of change really is a quality of a deficiency. It's kind of an imperfection that things have, in which things can go out of existence. But God himself is the fullness of existence. He has no pervasion of any kind within him, and thus suffices. So this is really characterized as kind of reality having certain levels. In the you have act being on a higher level than potency, and you have pure act is purest, God himself, the prime mover, being the highest of all of reality. Later on, you have kind of a further distinction in the conception of essence and existence. So existence, it would be something a little more different. It would be a quality in its own right. So so I have an essence of being a human being, but I also exist. And we could also think of human beings that no longer have existence. They're dead or gone, and they no longer have existence, but we can understand them by way of understanding their essence. And of course, historical information and all that. And the fact is, things are sustained in existence at any particular time by this pure act of existence. So that's really the cosmology both the medieval scholastics are working with, that they're in part inheriting a lot from Aristotle, that Trey Jadlow is trying to articulate, but doesn't really well, instead of trying to explain it on a historical level, he just says evolution is stupid a lot. So, yeah.
If God doesn't change in his pure act, wouldn't that entail that the universe is eternal?
Actually, a lot of people would say it would. Aristotle believed that it did.
I would think you would have to say that, right?
Yeah, because otherwise he would have to go from the state of not creating a universe to a state of creating the universe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges I was going to give to you was the accidental addition of time, of temporality. But it seems like right now I can't think of a reason why you can't just say the universe is eternal.
Well,
is that an option for Trey, though?
Well, if the universe is eternal, right, they want to say that God sustains existence. So someone would have to show that existence is something that requires being sustained.
Yeah, and that was the whole purpose of, the first mover argument as put forward first by Aristotle, but it was reformulated into the first way by Aquinas. If anyone wants to look at how to try to give answers to this, because they're committed to the foundation, they're committed to the notion that the universe did begin to exist by God, creation ex nihilo, whereas Aristotle believed that the universe was eternal, and so did quite a few of his Islamic followers. The Summa Theologia, question 46, first part, attempts at giving answers, and apparently at the time there were 10 objections against God creating the universe from nothing, to which Aquinas responds to 10. I haven't looked over them, so I can't really vouch for their veracity. But what's interesting about Thomas Aquinas is he also didn't believe you could show philosophically that the universe had a beginning. He thought that it was a matter of faith. It wasn't a matter. You couldn't show that the universe begin, but you couldn't show otherwise that it had to be eternal. So he tried to say philosophy is agnostic on this one. I'm not going to say one thing or another.
I don't think that we could know either way, either.
Right. So there, yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think maybe Aquinas would probably rely, if I had to guess, on his essence existence distinction. So, so the objection is, so if God goes from a state of affairs where he is not sustaining to a state of affairs where he is sustaining, then really isn't God kind of trying to change something which is at the time nothing? But really, if God is sustaining something in existence, he's sustaining it through existence itself. He's sustaining it by giving it existence. Whereas Aristotle thought that there was no separate quality of existence. Existence was not. I guess I'll use it. Existence was not a predicate. Existence is not a metaphysical quality to things. Existence is rather just fundamental to something having form. So again, there's a lot of historical commentary on that much that I wasn't prepared for. If Felino wants to have me back again, maybe I could bone up on it.
Yeah, I don't think existence is a predicate either.
Yeah. Neither. Yeah, I'm on the fence on that one.
I don't think Helena's going to ask you back, given your deplorable performance.
I will always.
Well, evolution is stupid.
Yeah, evolution is stupid. So, Joe, you wanted to talk about intentionality and normativity with Max.
I don't know why. I'm not really well read on either of those things.
Well, the trouble that I have is articulating an important aspect of normativity, but I think that Jack might be able to articulate that.
Normativity, as in the way things ought to be.
When you're looking at intentionality, it seems to be the case that you would see it as normative, right? Go ahead.
Normativity applies to moral oughtness, but it applies to other things. It's kind of like a standard that can be you could act in or out of accord with, right? Which also applies to like moral norms, but it applies to other things also.
Like that's the part where you're acting in or out of accord is kind of the key thing, I think, in this argument, because if it's the case that God is infallible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then one of the issues is how can we differentiate between just causal dispositions or acts of God, or intentional acts of God? Because the way we can, if it is the case that intentionality is normative, then you can act in accord or out of accord with your intentions. Like I'm throwing darts at a dartboard. I intend to hit the bullseye, but instead I hit Jack in the face with the dart. And it's funny, but I didn't intend to do that. I intended to hit the bullseye. So there's a possibility of failure there. My intentions fail to track my actions. Whereas if you see a lightning bolt strikes a tree, and there's a barn right next to the tree. You only say, look, this lightning bolt causal activity resulted in the lightning bolt hitting the tree. It doesn't make sense to say that the lightning bolt failed to hit the barn. But that's just causal dispositions. Now, if God is infallible, then
we wouldn't say that the lightning bolt was aiming for one thing but missed or something.
Yeah. Now, so if God's infallible, it doesn't seem like you would be able to identify like the activity, or you would be able to identify things that would be attributed to his intentions. You wouldn't be able to, I guess, account for God's intentions by. See, this is the part where I kind of mess up on. It seems to me like because he's infallible, you can't
even have intentions.
you can't have them, or you certainly can't. Well, go ahead.
So the idea is that intentionality is a normative notion, right? Which means that there's a possibility of failure, but God being perfectly efficacious, it's impossible for him to ever fail.
Yeah.
So are you saying that God can't have intentionality because intentionality requires a possibility of failure, but because God is perfect and he can't fail, he can't have intention?
It's the possibility of failing to be in accord with what you intended to do, just as an example. So how can God, what makes things normative for us, let's just talk about when you intend to do something, is that there's always a possibility that you'll miss, like using the dartboard example. So that's what sort of makes it so that you're intending to do something, is that there's this chance that you won't make it. But that's never true for God. So how can he intend to do something? There's no possibility there that he might not do it.
Well, if you allow for simultaneous causality.
We're not just talking about intentions, though. We're just talking about intentional
Yeah.
states generally. So
I just used it as an example.
Beliefs and desires. Yeah, but it was a misleading example, as you would say. Hey, so I just thought
he's not going to be able to be serious if I keep on laughing. I'll mute.
You're serious bastards.
So it's not just intentions, as Helena misleadingly implies.
I said as an example.
But beliefs and desires as well.
Yeah, beliefs and desires also.
Is it possible to put Helena to unbroadcast her? Or
oh my God.
No.
Let's get back to Max.
Pass out some mods, Helena, so we can unbroadcast.
I am not passing out mods to you guys.
Well, yeah, Max, what do you think of that?
Yeah, Max.
Prima facie, it seems to be a good argument.
All right, welcome.
Yeah.
So you're an atheist now.
I said prima facie. I mean, there are a lot of good.
I'm sensing some resistance.
Well, he said he hasn't read up on intentionality, so he's just saying it seems good, but he needs to look into it or something like that, right?
Right. There's always the whole appeal to prudence.
He's not saying. He's just saying.
Why don't you express your intuitive reaction right in front of Jack?
I did. I said prima facie. That looks like a really good argument.
Max, I think it's not even necessarily to do with intentionality. The important aspect is the concept of normativity. It seems to me like if failing to be in accord with not just intentions, not just mental states, that kind of stuff, you could fail to be in accord of all manner of things, but that's not an option for God. Like similar arguments I've heard in the past, for example, for free will, I don't think they would work for you, but go ahead.
Oh, I was actually going to ask, can we go through this argument again in a premise a premise to conclusion fashion? It'd be nice to actually capture this one.
Okay, so like premise 1, intentional states are normative. Premise 2, normativity entails the possibility of failure. God Premise 3, God's perfectly efficacious, and so he cannot fail. Conclusion, God doesn't have intentional states.
Conclusion. Intentional states are normative. Normativity is that which requires a possibility of failure. God can't fail. He's impeccable. Therefore, God has no intentionality.
God's perfectly efficacious, so he cannot fail.
There's no possibility of failure even, so you can't even find a loophole through that route, it seems.
I guess I'd probably start by trying to push back on God is perfectly efficacious.
That's surprising.
Yeah, mostly in terms of what efficaciousness would entail. So, for example, from what I'm gathering, we're discussing efficacious in terms of efficient causality. By efficient causality, I mean
it just means whenever God tries to do something, he will succeed.
I guess this would still allow for certain forms of deism. You know, the kind on Aristotle's viewpoint, God doesn't try to do anything because he's perfectly content in his own being, but he sustains the universe because everything has a final cause of trying to emulate God.
Yeah, it's aimed at like the classical theist style God.
Right. It's aimed at, well, Aristotle is a classical theist, but Aristotle isn't. I think what you mean is it's aimed at the God of personal revealed religions.
I think that the Jews, Christians, and Muslims believe in a classical theist style God.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're just disagreeing on semantics.
Well, since you mentioned the Jews, I think we're disagreeing on Semitics.
Oh, okay.
Oh!
Sorry, just had to make the fun.
Actually, Eddie is a Semite because he's Lebanese.
That is true. Wait, actually, are the no? I'm Lebanese. Yeah, I am Lebanese, but the Lebanese aren't. I'm not sure if they actually come from the Semites because they're Phoenician in origin.
Are you from
Phoenicians
Phoenix?
were Semites.
Were they? Oh, okay.
What's this do to divine simplicity?
Well, actually, divine simplicity might be appealing to divine simplicity would probably be a way to get out of it because one could say that, for example, intentional states, because they're not univocal, exist in a way that's in God that's different from us, and so that they wouldn't require failure. Although that would require
without the intentionality part.
I'm sorry?
It just has to do with this analogous reasoning for God. God has a mind, except it has no feature in common with our mind.
So God has one so in terms of relating God to the rest of existence, proponents of divine simplicity just state that God is wholly other than creation, and by wholly other they mean that he has an ontology unique to himself that nothing else has. So all human beings.
Is it wholly other than our experiences?
Yes.
Then I think we can't have a coherent concept of God in that case. It would be like fourth primary color.
Kant himself actually gives an account of analogy. So one way of understanding God in an analogous fashion is to state that when we attribute qualities such as intentionality or to God, beliefs, etc., what we're saying is, in terms of the causal role he plays with us, it's better to understand him as through these analogies for relational reasons. How he is in himself is numinal. We don't know, but
analogies only work when there's features that come in between the thing being described in the analogy.
Yes, and the things that are that would be in common is their relational aspects. So if I was to act with human beings such that they didn't have intentional states, beliefs, etc., like all human beings were just objects like any other, then I'm not really going to have a good time gaining knowledge from other human beings, interacting with them, etc. Whereas likewise, God would be a being where it would be better to understand him as an intentional agent in order to have
that doesn't explain what features in common our minds have with God's.
Relational features.
That's just a vagary.
That's a what?
You're just being vague.
So is it possible? All right. So you could. Do you understand what it means to treat an inanimate object like it was a person? Anthropomorphizing.
Yeah, sure, we could do that.
Okay. And you'd understand why it would be irrational for someone to treat a book in an anthropomorphic way, right?
A book in it? Did you say a book in an anthropomorphic way?
A book, any kind of inanimate object.
I don't think it's necessarily irrational to do so.
Is that Trey Jadlow?
It's Trey Jadlow.
Like I don't think it's like irrational for like an owner of a ship to call his ship her and give it a name and stuff like that.
Why not?
Because it doesn't violate any of the norms of reasoning.
Okay, but what if he was
like he's using an invalid inference rule or something like that in doing so?
What if he was treating it? What if he was treating it like a woman, or like full on like sex, all that?
God is not wholly other. I don't know. If God is wholly other, then there's no meaning. There's no possibility of having any connection with him. To say that he is simple. Now we need to speak of him with apophatic terms. In other words, by way of negation, being negativa. For the most part, we've got to just take attributes that we understand and then negate them. We can't have full comprehension of him, but because he is.
If you reason
hold on, Hal. Just let him finish his
let everybody finish their entire sentence before you jump in.
I was pretty much finished. That's fine.
Okay, yeah.
I think that when you reason about what God is through negation, there's no concept there as to what God is. You can actually have a belief in God.
Well, oh no, sure they can. It's like We also talk about the via causalitatis, which means that there is a relationship between the cause and the effect. That doesn't mean you can't have a full understanding of it, but that doesn't mean it's this is what Aquinas used, which Max probably knows, is by way of analogy, using analogical language. That's what I like to use.
How can you have a belief in something without any concept of what it is?
I'm not saying there isn't a concept. I'm saying there is a concept of it, but it cannot be fully apprehended.
Oh,
just like you don't understand quantum mechanics, it doesn't mean you can't understand anything.
But in academic theology, God isn't anything that we ever think of.
Wait,
Side chat, Max. Side chat.
Oh, sorry, just to jump in here, maybe to clarify this. Just going back earlier to the principle of there is nothing which is in the effect which didn't exist in the cause. So going back to the hierarchy or chain of being, God is pure actuality, whereas human beings are kind of a mixture of act and potency, or there's something which at any point in time when humans exist is permeant and something which is potent. So even though we don't know what God is in himself, we know that the use of analogy is perfectly reasonable, considering that whatever there is in God, considering whatever exists in us, which is actual, it must exist in a greater extent in God himself.
I got to be careful with that, because we're not extrapolating humanity just writ large. This is one of the problems that we have with we're having the same controversy in my church denomination, that since the Enlightenment, there's been a lot of sloppy thinking about God, and we're just recapturing some wonderful thinking about God, like simplicity and impassibility have been very much eschewed, especially guys like William Lane Craig hate it. But I think it's something that we need to regain, and I think it's because of the loss of categories of Aristotelian thought, and we're regaining those. I think you were talking earlier, Max, about, you guys were discussing the difference between Aristotelian physics and early modern physics, and certainly Aristotelian physics was weak. But what happened is, during the Enlightenment and the Kantian Revolution, we threw off all categories of Aristotelian thought, and I think we're all the worse for it when we think about things such as metaphysics. We're not allowed to talk about metaphysics, like pornography now today, but we're beginning to regain that and think about it.
I'm a Kantian. Impassibility is something that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know.
Okay.
How it could work.
Well, okay. So, this is going to go back to my fundamental argument. There must be something that is impassible. Otherwise, there is nothing that is passible. In other words, there can't be change of ontology unless there is something that is unchanging in ontology, and to give it rise. Because something cannot be and not be at the same time the same relationship. And so your passibility cannot arise before it does, before it exists.
I don't understand what passibility means.
Yeah, let me write it. It means that God is not, I had it memorized, I don't know if I can do it now, but God is not moved from emotional states, either from anything that affects him from without or even within himself. There's no change. So he doesn't move. All right, so for example, you get angry, you get happy, you move from one state to another as you are acted by something on the outside from you. God, being perfect being, does not move from state to state. Say, for example, love and hatred. Those are accidental properties for us. That means that those are properties that we take on and that we have, but it's not essential to our property. And we can have it, but we can also lose it and still maintain our personhood. I always use the example of my hair or my beard or something. Those are accidental properties to me. I can do those without, and I can still be me. I can have love and hatred, and I move from state to state. God does not move from state to state, but God actually, what are affections in us are perfections in God. That's why the Bible says that God does not love. It says that God is love. In other words, he is identical. His essence and his being are identically the same because he is pure act. And so impassibility just basically says that God is not affected by something outside of him, and he doesn't move from one emotional state to another. Many people today, theologians, don't like that because, it makes God this, Planting, I like that, says that it makes God to be a cold and inert property, but he misunderstands it. Impassibility does not say that God is without emotion, but he is the perfection of all love and all justice and all wrath. He is the perfection of them. In fact, he's the exact opposite of an impersonal property. He's the perfection of the personal property itself.
I thought the concept that God doesn't change is called immutability, and impassibility is the idea that we are the creation, but God didn't gain the relational property of being the creator.
That's right. He acts as he has. For example, when, I don't know if you heard my ring. I've talked about this a lot lately, but when you walk through the sand on the beach, you're acting upon the patient of the sand. You're making an indentation in the sand, but also the sand is making an indentation in your foot if you look on it in there. And so you are both being act and patient. But when God acts upon something, he is the act, but he does not receive from that anything in and of himself. So he's not one that is affected by that which he creates. So his act as creator does not affect his ontology as it would for us. It brings change of state for us, but it does not for him.
So relational properties is properties we have in relation to something else. Like I can impregnate a woman, right, and gain the relational property of being a father, for example.
Yes.
Because there's
There are, so one distinction that's made is between Oxford properties and real properties. So, for example, imagine Socrates is 6 foot, and then after someone chops his legs off, he's 5'4". So there is an actual change going on, but it's in Socrates himself. He goes from the property of being 6 foot to 4'4". Now imagine for some reason, the universe itself grows, and everything except Socrates grows to the point where Socrates becomes 5'4" in relation to everything else. Socrates doesn't undergo any change, but everything around him does. Or take a less elaborate example. If I were to shoot one of his children, then he goes from being a father of 3 to being a father of 2. There's nothing about Socrates that changes. But there is something about in relation to Socrates which changes.
Yeah, some of his relational properties will change, like being taller than, for example.
Exactly. So the idea of God being being both impassible and immutable, and a cause, and the cause of everything would be in a similar way, where God is causing everything to change. Everything around God is changing, but God himself doesn't change as a result of that. And yet it's God that's sustaining this consistent change as it goes onward.
Yeah, but I don't understand how, like, God could create the universe and then not have the relational property of being the creator.
Well, there's a relationship in that.
He does have the relationship. He does have the relational property. We can allow for relational changes in God, or Cambridge properties in God, but just not real changes in God himself.
But in immutability, right? Nothing inherent in God changes. Impassibility is that he doesn't have relational properties like being the creator.
No, he does. He just can't be affected by his creation. He can't be directly affected by his creation.
Right, and I'm saying that's just the concept of immutability rather than impassibility.
They're related. I mean, impassibility, immutability. I mean, they're both very closely related. It's not the same thing.
Yes, I agree with that.
And simplicity is a natural corollary to that as well. He can't be made up of parts.
I'll be right back.
Just going to the encyclopedia, impassibility is the divine attribute whereby God is said not to experience inner emotional changes of state, whether enacted freely from within or affected by his relationship to an interaction with human beings and the causal order. So I think the difference in focus is one of us is focusing more on relationship to, and the other is more focusing on inner changes or state. But I think the relational changes can be there. It's just that those relational changes cannot therefore lead to inner emotional changes.
Oh, okay. I guess I was misinformed on what impassibility was.
Yeah, no worries. So, anyone catch that Patriots game last week? Okay, never mind. What gives, Trey? I thought you were all about that blue collar stuff.
No, I'm not a sports fan. I don't really like. I don't know. I'm nerdy.
Okay, then I am revoking your blue collar right now.
So
I like to sit around. I don't drink, but I like sitting around with my friends and drink and talk, and I like to hang out with blue collar folks. They're just, like I said in my hangout, they're unpretentious. They're just you know that you're loved by them, and there's nothing to get in the way, like money or status or anything like that.
Yeah, Rousseau. Actually, that's kind of what Rousseau also liked about blue collar people as well.
Max,
He also
last
kinda
time would you mind going over how
the truth maker notion?
No, I wanted to do that, but I always end up wanting to attack simplicity, so I should stop that. I'm more interested in the intentional states. It does seem like that's something. The analogy with our intentional states should be more robust.
See, I didn't understand what you were saying, Joe, about intentionality, that God, I don't understand it, that God can't be intentional. You can't extrapolate from our experience up to God, because God ad intra, in other words, as he is in and of himself.
It wasn't from our experience.
Well, yeah, but you're saying, you used an example of you, and you say, well, since I do that, then God must be like that.
Well,
no.
I think maybe a more pertinent question to ask is, how can God, who doesn't undergo any change himself, have intentionality? Because forget normativity, it seems change is required for intentionality.
That's right. And that's what I'm saying.
Would you want to go down that route, Joe?
I mean, that's certainly a route we could go, but I feel like the newer objection, I want to make it clear with Trey. Trey, the concept of normativity, I take it to be you can be in or out of accord of whatever thing you're saying is normative. For example, you can be in or out of accord of your cognitive faculties or intentional states. And so if that's the case, and God he's infallible, it doesn't seem like he doesn't have the ability to be out of accord with his intentional states.
Yeah,
but that possibility is how we can understand intentional states, because of their normativity. But if that's the case, then it seems like God can't have intentional states.
Okay, but are you describing intentional states as contingent predication?
Intentional states as they're contingent upon.
Do they rely upon anything more foundational existing?
Or are they changing, and are they related to time? In other words, God does not predicate ad intra the way he is. In other words, every statement that we make is not simple. We can't even think a simple thought. but we predicate about things. Every sentence, you got the subject and you got a predicate. That's what every proposition is with us. God does not predicate anything. So how can you say that God must have the possibility of some kind of fallibility in his choice in order to be? It's like that's the wrong category.
What? Wait, actually,
we're saying that intentionality is something that's normative. It's a normative concept.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the way you're describing it is phenomenological, right?
No.
Yeah. Well,
you're not describing it from the phenomenal world that you live in. That's not how you
I
understand
didn't
it.
explain what the experience of it was like or something like that. So it's not a phenomenological account.
it's numinal. Sorry, yeah, you said you were Kantian, so I'm
if
just
you're going to
borrowing
say
the
it's numinal,
language.
that's just a cop out.
Wait, Hal, you said you were Kantian, so just to use the lingo, would you say it's more numinal?
Well, I think that intentionality is a part of our phenomenology. It's not numinal. But I'm saying I'm not explaining what intentionality is in terms of the phenomenology of us having intentionality, like what the experience of the intentionality in us is like or something.
Then how are you explaining it?
I'm just spelling out what the concept of intentionality is without explaining what the experience of intentionality is like.
I don't know how you can do that.
I can explain what the concept of number two is without explaining us experiencing like someone writing a number two on a piece of paper or something.
Well, when you write the number two on it, even talking about it, you're speaking by way of predication and by way of change, and that's how you're speaking of intentionality. I don't know how you can't explain it without such terms, which would be phenomenological.
Failure isn't a phenomenological term.
I'm sorry?
Failure isn't a phenomenological term.
There's a predication in the action, a movement from one state to another, and there's a failure to what you desire.
I'm not understanding what the problem is here.
Well, I'm just saying, you're saying that's not possible for God to be intentional because it doesn't jibe with what you would experience here.
I didn't refer to what my experiences are like.
Did you not say that?
I said that intentionality is a normative notion. That doesn't say anything what my experiences are like.
Okay, what do you mean when you say it's a normative notion?
I'm saying that the concept of intentionality entails normativity.
Which means what?
I don't know how to explain it in a more simple way.
Well, I mean, you said it's not phenomenological. It doesn't relate to you as you live in the world today.
Logical entailment isn't phenomenology.
I'm sorry?
Logical entailment isn't an issue of phenomenology.
Well, yes, it is. Logic is predication. That's how you make. That's what law of non-contradiction is, a predication. Everything is in logic.
Law of non-contradiction isn't an experience.
Right. And you predicate about something and you measure a relationship between those predications.
He's not, I think what Hal is going for is, he's not saying intentionality is like qualia. It's not, a qualitative state of being, but rather it's, when it's rather a mental disposition. It's when our thoughts are about something, not what it is like for our thoughts to be about something.
Yes.
So, for example, right now I'm thinking of a grilled cheese sandwich. Now, I can tell you what it's like to think for my thoughts to be about a grilled cheese sandwich. It's kind of encouraging me to go upstairs and make a grilled cheese sandwich. It's getting my mouth a little drooly because I like the thought of eating a grilled cheese sandwich. Excuse me, I'm gonna go make a grilled cheese sandwich, but
this guy right here.
This guy, but intentionality works along those lines. It's just when our thoughts are about something, and what you seem to be going for, Trey, is asking, oh, you're describing intentionality as a quality of what does it mean for our thoughts to be about something.
Yes.
See, like a belief is an intentional state, right? I can have a belief, and then I can also have an additional thing, which is an experience of having the belief.
Out of curiosity, though, is it, if I were to ask you, if someone were to ask me, does Hal believe that is Hal an eliminative materialist? Does Hal believe in eliminative materialism? Now you're not thinking about eliminative materialism when I answer that question, so I wouldn't. So if I was to say, he usually isn't, but if you were to ask him, then he would be. Like, it seems that we don't have to be. It seems that we can have beliefs without being conscious of them, or without them manifesting.
I think that's a very complicated issue that lead us off track, whether or not you can have like unconscious beliefs like Freud believed or something like that.
I know this is kind of why I'm usually hesitant to speak about it in intentionality, not my doghouse.
I don't understand how something, how could God have a belief? I don't understand that.
So,
well, a belief is one kind of one instance of having an intentional state, right? Intentional states are mental states that are about things, so like intentions, goals.
That only contingents can do.
The idea is that if God is a person, and God therefore has a mind, right, and God has properties like knowledge, such as knowing all true propositions, given that knowledge is understood to be a type of belief, right, it's natural to attribute God beliefs such as the belief in each proposition that's true, right?
No, because belief is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's all.
Oh, well, I was just saying, God doesn't believe anything. God knows everything.
Yeah,
belief
but
entails fallibility.
Type of belief.
I think that knowledge is a subset of belief.
I think
knowledge is minimally analyzed as true belief, right? I mean, there's often
like
other conditions like justification that are added. So some people will say justified true belief, but minimally it's going to be true belief.
There are actually, although there is a school of thought about that says knowledge itself is basic.
I don't think they would be able to defend that, right? I can't know something if I don't also believe it to be true.
Yeah,
Trey, do you understand this idea that knowledge is?
I mean, the idea is that belief is a propositional attitude. It is to hold it to be true. So you couldn't actually know something without holding it to be true, right? If we're talking about propositions.
Yeah, again, we're all talking about, because we don't know things, therefore we have to predicate about them. It's just, to me, it's just like a complete apples and oranges scenario.
I'm not seeing how you're responding to the objection that we're making, right? We're saying that knowledge is understood to be a type of belief. That knowledge is a type of belief. Well, I don't know.
Okay, so you agree?
I don't. If you say that knowledge is a type of belief, and you attribute knowledge to God, but say in God's case, knowledge is not a type of belief, I'm not understanding why you would attribute that property to God in the first place, rather than call it something else, like knowledge.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So you could say God schmoes all true propositions.
Yes.
Right. In that case, then you just have to give us an account of what it means to schmo something, since I don't think anybody here has any idea what that would be.
And that's where analogical language comes in, and you've got the nature of the word changes regarding the
with analogies is that analogies only work right when there's a common property that's shared across the analogy, and that's why we were asking you for the common property.
You know, you're
asking for common property is, right?
No, you're asking
Jack,
for
can you get closer to your mic or something? I'm going to turn you up a bit, but if you can handle that.
So you're asking for univocism, and that I'm saying that's not possible. We can't have analogy.
again, if you want to say that God has something that's analogous to human minds, right? In order for there to be an analogy between the two, there has to be some common property shared across the analogy, right? Otherwise, you're just saying God has a mind and human beings have minds, and there really isn't anything more we can say about it, right? And since we don't know what a mind is,
sure we do.
Then
he has a mind that is not subject to change. We have to have all of the ducks in a row there, and there is an answer to
not an answer to the question.
You might as well say God's mind is like a leaky screwdriver or something.
Yeah, we're asking you, right? If you say that God has knowledge, right, but his knowledge is not the type of knowledge which is a subset of belief, right? We're asking you, in virtue of what does it actually count as knowledge rather than knowledge?
The very fact that we have knowledge. There is an analogy there, but it's not something that is predication, because predication is necessary.
I'll repeat the question. I'll repeat the question.
Okay.
In virtue.
No, that's okay. It's okay. I guess I just don't understand.
Yeah. So
I need to go.
Okay. So long.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys later. Okay.
Later, Trey.
So, Jack, did you take up smoking? You seem kind of out of breath there.
He's probably riding a bike.
I'm on a bike.
Oh, wow.
3-speed bike.
So wait, you're riding a bike and participating in a Google. Wow, you know how to multitask. Kudos.
I have a feeling
while he's bicycling.
Well, Max, what do you think of this?
Well, no. On prima facie, it's a pretty good argument. Sorry.
Like we can talk about a common example of an analogy and why it works, right? Look at the rubber sheet analogy for the analogy of gravity, right? The only reason that analogy works is because there's features in common between the ball being on a rubber sheet and gravity. Like if you put another ball on the sheet, it will have a tendency to rotate around the ball in the middle because of the curvature, just like space being curved around the object in the middle, right? But what if the rubber sheet analogy had no feature in common with gravity? Then how would the analogy work?
Well, so all right, so one response is to look at knowledge itself and look at something which tends to be the most mysterious way of accessing knowledge. Are you guys sympathetic to an intuitionalist understanding of or grasp of knowledge? You know, knowledge through intuition.
I think intuition can provide like prima facie justification.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think that the cogito ergo sum, or one's own existence is self-evidence?
It's basic.
No, it's something which. No, one's own existence, when I say self-evident, I mean that the very fact that you exist is constantly evident to you. It's constantly something that you are aware of.
No, I messed up. I was thinking you were still talking about the Williamson account of knowledge. So I was just thinking that I messed up. Sorry. Yeah, what you said made sense.
I don't know how something can be self-evident. I would just say it's obvious to me that I exist.
Right. And our existence is something that even if we're not conscious of, we seem to at least be aware of. And the distinction between being conscious of and aware of would be I can have a manifest notion that I exist. Sure. Like, oh yeah, that I exist. It's just coming there. But like day to day, it's just something that I work with in my behavior and my action. It's just it's just something that I continually grasp as I do pretty much everything.
Okay.
Okay. So let's just take that one thing, but imagine a being who, like that one understanding, has that about pretty much all facts which are the case. Like they're all there, they're all manifest, even if this being can't be said to be conscious of it, like its whole existence has it such that it's aware of all these things. I wouldn't understand why that being doesn't have intentionality, why it doesn't have some kind of knowledge.
The reason say a person believes they exist, right, is if they're prompted to bring it to mind by being asked, "Do you exist?" They'll say yes if they're assuming they're they're being genuine and stuff.
Sure, but if we're working just on the basis of analogy, then if if it has that in common with us, an awareness of true propositions, like that's something that's univocal to both, but really it's something we grasp only through analogy. So
I don't know what it means to say someone has a belief if it's something that they weren't conscious of and will never be conscious of.
Well, why don't we just call this schmallage? Schmallage is when you have an awareness of self-evident, when you have knowledge of true facts.
I don't even know how God would be aware on your account of it.
Well, it's the same. Well, it would work on a similar way to how I'm aware of my own existence. Even now, the only difference is I can bring it about to a conscious state of affairs, whereas God doesn't have that.
I think
but all that's required for the analogy is some form of commonality, as you said.
I think we commonly experience ourselves as existing unless we're in like a dreamless sleep or something.
Well, God. Well, I wouldn't understand why God couldn't, for example, just have all that manifest simultaneously all at once without change.
I don't understand how there creates a coherent idea to just experience everything all at once. What would the experience really consist in at that point?
There doesn't seem to be any contradiction.
Right, so we can imagine God experiencing what other people are experiencing, right? Because that's something that you want to say he has knowledge of, right? People's experiences.
Sure.
But it seems the only way he could do that is if it was like looking at a whole bunch of televisions of something, of what these people experience, but he's not experiencing then exactly what they're experiencing it, like through experiencing those experiences as them. He would be experiencing it like as an onlooker or something.
I don't know why he would need to experience it as an onlooker. I mean, if he's the one, I mean, if all truths pre-exist in him and then just manifest, then he would
be experiencing a whole bunch of stuff that contradict each other all at once. Like there being a car there or not being a car there simultaneously.
Or experiencing something being red all over and green all over.
Yes.
Well, in terms of how a human being experiences color, for example, I would understand why we would experience colors different from another organism, and onward, because we kind of get these qualities secondhand, whereas God would know them because he's the one, because these truths would pre-exist in him and then manifest itself later on. God would, there's this way of kind of understanding it. God knows about the effect by knowing himself perfectly. So God first has perfect knowledge of himself. So so God's awareness of himself would be prior, and then everything else as it manifests in creation would be secondary. So for example, I could understand a bit about animals by understanding myself, because I'm an animal, even though I'm far more rational than most animals. I am not a Homo habilis, but I could understand things about. I could know things about Homo habilis by understanding myself as Homo erectus.
I think if you knew yourself perfectly, there would still be a lot of facts you don't know about cats, even though you're both mammals.
True, but when it comes, but that's because I don't stand in that kind of direct causal relationship, whereas God would. So I think that would be the important distinction.
The reason would be that even though you know yourself perfectly, there would still be a lot you don't know about cat, is because even though there's similarities between you and a cat, you're not identical. So you wouldn't know the cat in virtue of knowing yourself.
So on the Thomistic Aristotelian account, there is a common cause called formal causality, which I went over. So one cause that exists is the formal cause, which is animality. This is something which causes me to be. This form causes both me to be an animal, and it's a genus that's shared in common with anything else in the animal kingdom. So it's actually through a common cause which I understand other kinds of animals, wherein the differences in other kinds of causes, the efficient cause, the material cause, the final cause, so on, the efficient causes, those are really the cause of the difference, which limits my knowledge to what I can know by understanding myself.
I don't think causing something entails knowing everything about it. Like, I can cause an avalanche, but be ignorant about a lot of facts about the workings of avalanches.
You would not be but you wouldn't be a sufficient account of what caused the avalanche to fall. So, for example, the avalanche would have things like material causes, like you didn't cause the avalanche. You didn't cause the snow to fall down the mountain by just bringing all the snow into being. You also didn't. You also didn't account for, So, for example, you could move if you move the avalanche using sound waves, then you weren't even the sole efficient cause. Rather, you used specific mediums.
Okay.
But by the way, I have class at 9:30 tomorrow. It's 11:38 right now where I am, so I'm gonna pack it in at 12 o'clock if you guys don't mind.
That's fine.
You could stay till 12:30.
I don't want to go to bed.
I think Aristotle equivocates on cause, though, because I don't really see why we should actually understand the four causes as all being a species of some general concept. Why wouldn't we just see them as, conceptually distinct, right? There's supposed to be some kind of general property across different causes. What is that?
Oh, like why ought we prefer understanding things as universals as opposed to nominalism?
I'm saying I don't really see why I would call a material cause a cause as opposed to an efficient cause. Right?
Well, I mean, I think Peter Kreeft says the four causes are better thought of as the four B causes, because they're. Does anyone mind if I turn Jack's mic off? I hear a lot of wind.
He's trying to figure out how to ride tornadoes across New York. I think it's faster. I don't know.
That would be pretty awesome. Wait, Jack, you live in New York, right?
Yeah,
I
he's in
doxed him.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
I have a friend who lives in New York. Would you be willing to do me a favor?
I don't see why not.
We're all wearing condoms. I don't really get it.
Well, I would hope you'd be wearing those in general, but I bought a pack. I bought some pipe tobacco, but
Oh, okay.
unfortunately I can't ship them across the border. I was wondering if I were to wire her some money and select a pouch tobacco from a local store, if you would be willing to pick it up and drop it off to her? And I'd throw in a little something for yourself too.
I might be willing to. Why is it you're trying to subscribe to her? I don't understand.
Jack, we can barely hear you.
Oh, she's into pipe tobacco, and I thought
Is she cute?
Oh yeah, very much so.
Okay, Jax, we'll do it then.
Oh no, Jack usually has like a lot of plans.
Okay, so I just got back. Can we summarize the last 2 hours of conversation, or however long it's been?
Jack's going to help me score.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Intentionally?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the thing. God can't have intentional states. People can't claim that God is a personal being. That's a lot of that. That's a big deal for people who want to run certain types of theism, or really, probably any kind of theism. So that would be an issue. And then Trey came in, and there was a lot of problems with the analogical.
Oh yeah, the analogical language where
Yeah.
we can't refer to this in this way that we refer to it. We have to refer to by means of analogy, but we can't actually name what it's analogous to.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems.
Yeah,
The interesting thing was immediately Maximus was like, "This is what is the same thing," because I think you're aware that is, it's like identify the commonality that allows the analogy to hold, which, I mean, did
your mom's a commonality.
Oh wait, so did Max actually
my
provide?
constant?
Did Max provide an answer for Trey?
No,
not
I provided an answer. Whether or not it's sufficient, I leave it up to anyone to decide.
Well, was your answer relevant to the intentionality? I think you were talking about something else with Hal.
Yeah,
Was
we're just talking. We're just talking about the capacity for something analogous to knowledge, if not knowledge in itself or intentionality in itself, or as we understand it.
Okay, so you weren't actually like addressing the how is something the parts of Trey's argument that are like how is God's mind like our mind or anything like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hal, how did you shut down his? Because Trey, that's what Trey does. He'll go, well, you're just using yourself as a standard, which you can't do whenever you're talking about God. I think I would be able to subvert that. It would take a long time. How were you able to?
He
deflate
was saying that I'm just appealing to the way I happen to experience things, and I pointed out exactly how I didn't appeal to any experience.
Yeah.
He was trying to say I was providing a phenomenological account, which I clearly wasn't. I was providing a conceptual account.
By the way, you're welcome, because I think I did a good part of clarifying it. And I also and I also am hungry for a grilled cheese sandwich, you bastard. You know what? That was actually my fault for thinking of that as an example.
The second time people were talking about grilled cheese today.
Wait, seriously?
It made me go up and get peanut butter.
No, wait, seriously, was this the second time?
Yeah, earlier we were talking with Annabelle, and she had an extended, like, anecdote about her and her friends, and her introduction to grilled cheese. It's a sign we should worship grilled cheese. What was I want the important things, because it's difficult for me to succinctly undermine these kind of games that I think Trey tends to rely on.
Actually, one thing I did learn from Hal in this exchange is that's always rather than for example trying to claim that the person went wrong, it's always best to ask them to clarify where you find that they're being obscure. That way they can't really turn this into a yelling match.
Right. I plan on going through some of Aristotle very soon.
Oh, if you are, I would. Could I suggest a trilogy for you?
His early hits are the best.
Check out Phaser before his actual books, not his blog.
Who?
Oh, so he's a popular Thomist.
I didn't hear the name because you
cut out Edward Phaser. Edward Feser.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think you kind of your mic cut out when you were saying the name there, because for a second there I thought you were talking about Aristotle's blog. And yeah.
Here, I'll write the name out.
Aristotle did have a blog, but it was a live journal. So.
The meta.
You're cutting it out.
If anyone is interested in reading Aristotle, start with the Metaphysics. It holds up really well. Also, Anthony Kenny has an intro to Thomas Aquinas, which explains how Thomists use Aristotle.
I'm most interested in reading his political theory, his ethics, and his stuff on rhetoric.
The Nicomachean Ethics is really good. I honestly really like the notion of understanding ethics through character. Whether it's sufficient enough, I don't know.
Philosophy of religion isn't really my favorite topic.
Well, not many people say that. No, at least in my experience. I like it. It.
It seems like if I say I enjoy philosophy and someone goes, "Oh, what do you know about the most, or what do you spend your most of your time dealing with?" I have to say philosophy of religion. So like I can't front. That's the philosophy I like. I wish I could say philosophy of science, but that is a whole nother monster.
Well, I end up discussing it a lot because usually there's the debates are going on. They're like atheist versus theist debates or discussions or whatever.
Are you talking right now? We can't hear you.
Now I'm actually right now. I'm going through. I have 5 courses right now. 1 in epistemology, 2 in ethics, 1 regular ethics, 1 animal European rationalism, and that's about it.
Oh, I'm an autodidact.
I don't know how to read.
So do you buy the books yourself? Or do you mostly grab them through that Russian website we don't talk about?
Well,
That is the greatest gift Nadia gave me.
Like for classic works of literature, I really like the Nook books because of the format of it and stuff. I find it pleasant to read, and they're usually very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So I go ahead and bother spending the money. But if it's really expensive, I will go to the website that must remain unnamed.
You're welcome, by the way.
Oh yeah, thanks. I also found a website that gets rid of you know how sometimes you're on one of those academic journals and then there's a wall that keeps you from accessing it unless you pay some fine?
Yeah.
There's a website that actually gets past all of those things.
Send it to me now.
Actually, I'm lying. There is no website, NSA. It doesn't exist.
See, I can use
access through other people.
Huh?
Or there's the subreddit Scholar. You can. I got 2 Schellenberg articles through that because philosophy and religion, that journal, it's so many articles in that journal I can't get.
Right now, I'm actually exploring a little bit of Chinese philosophy. I started reading Confucius.
I don't think I would